Good evening and welcome to another edition of Mental Health Monday, brought to you by Saving Grace Community Church in Grace House of Cincinnati. Thank you for joining us tonight as we delve into a very exciting, I won't say exciting, it could be depending upon who's involved, but a topic that really is representative of our climate today and really how people seek relief in kind of entertainment, really an addiction that's about how entertainment can turn bad. Joining me once again, as usual, is our resident expert, Dr. Quentin Moss, President, Founder, and CEO, and Chief Medical Director for Modern Psychiatry. Good evening.
Good evening. Great to be here, man.
Glad to have you on tonight. We're excited to be inside tonight, as it is quite the balmy evening.
It's hot. It is hot.
It is definitely smoking on tonight. Dr. Moss, as I said in our intro, a lot of people like to have a fun, and one of the sources of entertainment is gambling. And like many things, things in themselves can be fun for a while, but oftentimes can go to the left quickly.
Mm-hmm.
We know that in our country today, that one of the forms of entertainment is gambling. And a recent MSN article back in April shared that there were 465 commercial casinos. And at the end of 2019, they had a combined revenue of 43.6 billion. That's B with a B.
That's right.
billion dollars worth of sales. And 42 states have lotteries systems, and they reported that at the end of 2019, their lottery ticket sales, were a whopping 81.6 billion at the end of 2019. Now, of course, that's pre-pandemic. And in 2020, things kind of fell back, but recent numbers are showing a steady uptick as things began to get better. And in fact, in 2020, of October 2020, Americans legally bet on an estimated $3 billion on sports betting.
Wow.
So because they couldn't go indoors, they went online a lot of times. And so that was the highest ever recorded in history. In 1 month, $3 billion on sports betting.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2020, the betting revenue was up nationwide by 53%, according to sportsmedia.com. And in December, they record and report that New Jersey set the national sports betting record for the 5th consecutive month, taking in proceeds of $996.3 million in bets in one state for 1 year. Now, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money spent on what people have perceived to be as a safe and a fun way. But there are some folks that who are presented with the same opportunity or avenue for having fun can't handle themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so tonight we want to talk about the gambling addiction, and we want to talk about, and specifically as we think about our topic, all bets are off. And so share with us a little bit about the disorder, because most people don't think, well, they get a betting problem, that's one of those that can't they just stop, Share with us a little bit about that.
What we find with gambling disorder is very similar to what we find with people who suffer from addiction.
Mhm.
We have this issue of having to do something in this regards as gambling more and more, oftentimes using more and more money or gambling more frequently in order to get that same feeling, that same euphoria, that same rush or excitement. And when we try to stop or reduce our gambling, we become restless or irritable. We're not successful. We become preoccupied with finding ways to gamble, whether we're searching fantasy teams all day long, or we're trying to scrounge up pennies to go play the lottery, or we're buying a whole bunch of sneaky peeks books in order to try to figure out what the number is going to be, or we're trying to get all the scratch offs. We get preoccupied with it, and it causes a great deal of distress. And despite the circumstances of losing money, the preoccupation was doing to our families, our career, our education, we continue to do that. And that is the same behavior as we see with people who suffer from alcohol, who suffer from opioid addiction, cocaine.
Mhm.
And it also, highlights the same areas of the brain and releases very similar chemicals. So
Mhm.
they're almost identical in some regards.
Wow, wow. And as you've put on your slide, there's after losing, you go back to gamble to get even,
That's right.
and that you start lying, and the stresses that come on your family.
Hmm.
I heard someone describe a gambling addiction as being different. It said, you have a person that says, "I'm going to win back what I lost." They said it's similar to someone who has been diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver, who's an alcoholic, and them saying, "Well, I'm gonna keep going because my liver is gonna get better.
That's right.
I'm gonna keep drinking because my liver is gonna be better." And so, similarly, when a gambler says, "I'm gonna keep gambling to win balls, to win back what they have lost," they're kind of fooling themselves and could be characterized as being somewhat delusional. But we know of famous people whom this has just wreaked havoc on. I remember and recall there was a quarterback who played for Ohio State many years ago and never got on his feet professionally because of his addiction of gambling. And I understand now that he's in prison once again because of some behavior that related to to his addiction. So now, some people, I guess, like any other type of biological, physiological disease or disorder, are some are more predisposed are more susceptible to falling victim to this disorder. Can you share with us tonight, our audience, uh, who's more at risk
Hmm.
of becoming of having this addiction?
Clearly, if we have first degree relatives, talking about siblings or parents who suffer from gambling disorder, they're at greater risk for also having this condition. But this condition is also highly correlated with people who have mood disorders, whether you're talking about bipolar disorder or depression, people
Hmm.
who suffer from anxiety, also people who suffer from trauma. These people tend to have higher risk of developing this disorder. And we can talk about, what we've done in society that's created greater risk for minority groups. And that has also been a target for the gambling industry. But minorities tend to suffer more from some of the outcomes from gambling compared to whites.
Wow, wow, that's interesting. That's interesting. We know that alcoholism affects people of color most disproportionately, or at least there's based on money spent in marketing in those communities. You may become to believe that. Um, in terms of the minority community, do we find do we know if marketing and or advertising in lower income neighborhoods is higher in those neighborhoods and affluent neighborhoods?
So I don't have any information on marketing, but I can tell you a little bit of a story.
Okay.
So when we go into convenience stores, and
Hmm.
depending on where part of town we're in,
Hmm.
there's either a convenience store that has one line or a convenience store that has two lines.
Okay.
If you go in a convenience store that has one line, typically that's going to be in a more affluent and majority neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
You go in a convenience store that has two lines, one for
Mm-hmm.
people who are purchasing
Mm-hmm.
products and gas, and one
Mm-hmm.
line for people who are playing the lottery, you're most
Mm-hmm.
likely going to be in an
Mm-hmm.
impoverished neighborhood. So
Mm-hmm.
we have more selling of lottery tickets, scratch offs, in those establishments, and those establishments are typically in more poor neighborhoods. And these are also the same people who have more to lose
Mm-hmm.
from having this addiction. One of the correlates is that, some people use gambling as a way of entertainment, as you mentioned, but
Mm-hmm.
some people may see gambling as a way of trying to generate revenue.
Wow.
And we know that gambling is not a successful way for people who are impoverished to try to generate revenue.
Right. Based on, because if gambling and legalized gambling was not a profitable enterprise, then we would not have 485 casinos in our country. Let's take a look at one young lady who because one of the things I understand is that it's more men than women who gamble, and it seems to affect those. I understand that the middle age. There's a lot of people in the middle age who are gamblers. Here's one woman who is in her middle age and shares her story um, this evening as a part of a clip here.
Sandra's first taste of gambling came in 2005 when her friend invited her to a casino.
It was disturbing. The moment I walked in to the casino, I was immediately bothered by the environment. First of all, it stank. When I was walking around in this place and looking and thinking, how can this be fun?
A few spins of the slot machine and she won an $1,100 jackpot.
It out, crisp $100 bills into my hand. I wanted to go back. So now I have to have a reason to go back. So I decided, well, I'm going to pretend to be, I'm going to do some investigative journalism and seeing what's inside, what can I write about?
But Sandra's so-called research visits were just an excuse to keep gambling. More and more and more.
I would often leave and I feel sick. Now I'm starting to drink more. So I'm getting a double dose of all of this, overstimulation and getting drunker and drunker because I hate myself for being there. I hated myself for being in these casinos. And in my journal, so many of the entries say, this is unhealthy, this is dangerous, why are you doing this? And I started taking out advances on my credit card. Then I started going into my salary, using my earnings to gamble. This is it was very rapid. This was a very rapid decline. And it's all, along the way I'm telling myself, I need to stop because I'm going to destroy everything. I'm going to destroy my life.
Wow. She first recognized, that what she was doing was wrong. How typical is that for persons you see who are dealing with addiction in general, who find themselves and they recognize and they journal, but making the bridge from recognizing what the behavior is destructive and being destructive, and then at the same time adding alcohol to it.
Yeah, that's an old trick. If I can get you more disinhibited, then I can just continue to reinforce the disinhibiting behavior of the addiction. So that's a classic pairing. But people who suffer from addiction often recognize that, I have a difficulty, I have a problem, and I need to stop. But there are areas of the brain which control our cravings, our emotions, and our coping, our pleasure and drive. And then those areas tend to hijack other areas of the brain where we start to plan, rationalize, prioritize, that we start to execute. It hijacks that part of the brain such that, our addiction, whether it's with gambling or whether it's alcohol, cocaine, that becomes the number one priority. And we become disinhibited almost to a compulsive nature that's very difficult to stop the use.
Yeah, and she recognized that she was sliding, but she kept and continued on. Here's a little more.
Her first major scare came when leaving a casino after a night of heavy gambling and drinking.
And I went outside to go to my car. And just as I got to the car, I saw something glittering on the floor, on the ground, right by my car. And I bent down to pick it up. It was a woman's watch. And the next thing I know, I was being lifted off the ground. And they said, well, give us your car keys. You're too drunk to drive. And so I did.
After that, Sandra says she stopped gambling for over a year, but the drinking continued. And one night while drunk, she had the urge for those slot machines again and got behind the wheel.
I got stuck because I was apparently wavering like this. And the next thing I know, there's some lights behind me. It's the police. And it's like, they can't be pulling me over. And the next thing I know, this guy screamed at me and said, you're drunk. Turn around. And I was handcuffed and put in the back of the car.
Wow. 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 So we're guilty of stereotyping people who succumb to addictions. And when you look at that video, certainly she defies the stereotype of what your prototypical, what you might think a gambler looks like. Wouldn't you agree? Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree with that. And much like other forms of addiction, this can be insidious, and sneak up on us. And, it can affect any demographic, though it appears that there are some demographics that may have worse outcomes and may have greater risk, but it can affect anyone. And the more that we are aware that these disease processes are out there and what those risks are, the more careful we can be with some of these activities.
So, I mean, like anything, addictions and exposure to things can start early. And we know when we talk about substance abuse and we talk about alcoholism, you can introduce a child to alcohol by saying, hand me a beer. And certainly at a young age, as I've said previously, statistics show that younger and middle-aged folks are very much affected when you look at the numbers, higher percentage-wise. But even at a young age, if it's about here, go to the store and get these numbers for me. I'll play these numbers. Or the celebration of the family has when one wins. And so it I guess, Dr. Moss, what I'm moving toward is that you never know how what you expose someone to, how will it affect them? Because you yourself can handle it, perhaps they can't.
It's so true. And, one of the challenges with addiction, with gambling, and also with alcohol is that the exposure is everywhere. And television commercials, even with things that seem harmless, the money's going to be used for schools and books, and perhaps so, but there are lives that are devastated because of what happens with gambling. The state of Ohio has a toll-free number where people can get help. People are able to kind of register in casinos so that they are known not to gamble if they were to present there. There are some safeguards, but without people really being managed well in treatment, it's very difficult to stop this illness.
And because it's one of those things that can be done, especially with online betting and gambling, can be done in secret, and nobody may never know, except the person that may be living with you when the rent is falling short, when you're about to forfeit on your mortgage, it's about your home is about to go on foreclosure, because there are stories of persons who have taken out loans, who have put the houses up to secure monies to gamble. And so, though we look at it not being as bad, and I'm going to say that and use that phrase loosely, as someone who was on meth or someone who was shooting up on heroin, it can be devastating and have just as a profound effect on the family.
It can. So when we think about, substances, we know that, the health risk and the risk of death for that individual, and those behaviors do affect, offspring and so and whatnot. But if someone has a gambling disorder, I'm a psychiatrist, not an investor, but it affects generational wealth.
Hmm.
So all of the money that I've made for my family has now gone to this illness, and I can't plan for college. I can't put away retirement. I'm having to work more and more hours with less and less return. My ability to go up the corporate ladder or to excel my,
Hmm.
professional career gets stymied, and that affects generations. So
Hmm.
this is a severe illness that, again, not only affects them, but their family and maybe the generation that comes behind them.
Because once again, it's an addiction, but it can be minimized and say, well, that's not a big of a deal,
Yeah, yeah.
because again, maybe they're not health things that are associated with it, but there is stress, I'm sure, that may come with losing a whole lot. And there's some physiological things may come with the stress of knowing that you're about to be put out on the street. Here's another
Mhm.
clip of a person who's been battling.
$200,000. $200,000. Six figures that I lost in 5 years. 5 years. I'm 23 years old right now, and I started gambling heavily when I was 18 years old. I started gambling poker online. I really liked the game. I also bought a lot of scratch tickets. And when I say scratch tickets, I'm not talking about the $1, $2, or $5 scratch tickets. I'm talking about the $10 scratch tickets, the $20 scratch tickets, and the $30 scratch tickets. The Max Millions, yeah, I'd buy like 3, 4 of those at a time. I ended up losing $8,000 in the whole entire year. I maxed out both my credit cards. They had $1,500 on them, on each of them. My parents bailed me out and paid for my credit cards. I'm 19 years old. I have a scholarship to play soccer. I was supposed to do business in school. Unfortunately, I didn't focus on school as I was continuously gambling. And I was 19 at the time, so I started going to casinos. Baccarat, roulette, and poker were my three worst enemies. When I was 18, I lost 8,000. 19, I lost 15,000. I wasn't focusing on school. I lost my scholarship. Now I'm in debt. I owe my parents $9,000 plus I owe the tuition. I get a warehouse job, and that year I made $33,000. Paid off all my debts, and I gambled the rest. I got $7,500 loan. I had 2 jobs, and I lost it all away because I had this dream, I had this goal, I had this ambition that was fake and wrong, and just the part that I wish I could take back is that what I know now, 5 years ago, I wish that's what I knew.
Wow,
Mm,
wow,
mm.
wow, wow. So again, 19 years old, 23 years of age now,
Wow.
and he's blew over $200,000 in debt. And I think when we think about the effect and the alarming effect and the catastrophic effect that other addictions can have on folks, we really don't. When we look at this addiction, it goes back to availability. And so, as you said earlier, there's two lines in some area in less affluent areas, but accessibility. So when we want to reduce heroin opiate use, we try to cut off the supply line. When we want to limit alcohol abuse, we say we're going to card more, or we're not going to sell on Sundays, or we're not going to sell after certain times. But when it comes to someone who may be dealing with a gambling addiction, that demon is readily available.
That's right. Unrestricted.
Unrestricted. And so we're not talking about trying to cut off the supply line, because when it comes to lottery tickets in particular, because the end justifies the means. And after all, education is a noble cause, funding that. So who in the world would come against something as that? And so when we look at what's been used on other addictions, are there any medications at all that are being used, or I mean, because we know that someone has like a heroin overdose, and everybody can say Narcan or whatever. Everybody can speak that because we just associate that with. But when it comes with someone having a gambling addiction, is there a drug that's used to kind of control those impulses?
The first I'll say that there is no medication approved by the FDA specifically for this. There
Hmm.
is no FDA approved drug like we have for people who suffer from alcohol or from, addiction of fentanyl.
Hmm.
But there are some medications that are used that may be able to help treat some of the symptoms.
Hmm.
Two of the things that we're using more for this condition are things, one of which is can be bought over the counter, and that's
Mm.
N-acetylcysteine, that's NAC.
Mm.
And this particular compound has been shown to be helpful in reducing cravings for a number of addictions, not just gambling.
Hmm.
And then, there is this medication called naltrexone,
Mm.
which is the medication that we use for people who suffer from alcohol and people who have opioid use disorder. And
Wow.
that medication has been shown to help people who also have gambling disorders. I like to add, Pastor, that, many of the people that I've treated for this condition
Mm-hmm.
initially came in not necessarily for the gambling disorder.
Okay.
That's something that we uncovered as we got more history and the
Mm-hmm.
patient felt more comfortable and starting to share some different information. But they came in because they were terribly anxious, or they
Mm.
came in because they were suicidal. So they
Mm.
have these comorbid or these co-occurring mental health conditions which do warrant treatment and do have medications which can target them. So I
Mm.
like to say that. But there are, talk therapies or counselings that have been shown to be very effective in
Mm-hmm.
helping people with this condition. So this is one of those things where we may be able to provide a medication, but surely the bulk of the work is going to be involved in individual counseling, group counseling, Gamblers Anonymous, getting some support there, using those tools in addition from, having disclosure and support from your family to be able to manage the illness.
Well, I think it's important to yeah, disclosure and having that network. But as I said earlier, there are some people that may not look like the prototypical gambler,
Hmm.
but some have suggested that certain personality types are extremely and highly susceptible to falling victim to this disorder. Some have said that workaholics, people who are highly competitive in nature, who are bored, who are just restless, um, you know, set themselves up for being a risk. And then some have even said that some medications used to treat Parkinson's disease and restless leg syndrome also may spur on or awake someone's behavior to be compulsive and go uh, to gamble. How do you react to that?
That is a potential outcome of these medications.
Mhm.
Medications that have a way of increasing or flooding dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter that's indicated with Parkinson's. Having said that, if you do have Parkinson's disease, these medications have been well studied, safe for most people. Talk with
Mhm.
your doctor. There's a great need for a lot of people to be on that medication, but also be aware of mood changes and changes in impulsive behaviors if you were to start them.
Wow, wow. It's amazing because it seems like with anything to treat anything, there's always a caveat. This is a great medication, but on the flip side, you got to watch out for this. You got to watch out that. So you want to be very, very careful uh, to how that happens. And so you said earlier that some have come in with presenting some other problems,
Hmm.
and but then you found out gambling was a part of it.
That's
And
right.
I uh, make the connection of why someone who may be suffering from um, bipolar disorder, personality disorder, may be uh, susceptible to this.
Some of what we know about addiction and also gambling, involves certain pathways in the brain. There are a couple of pathways in particular. One that has to do with the reward system, which is the ventral tegmentum and nucleus accumbens, that area, which is also in part, affected by mood. But there's also this challenge with this area called the amygdala. And the amygdala is a part of the brain that kind of triages stress, coping, comes up with the best pathway for our response. And for people who suffer from mood disorders, anxiety disorders, people who suffer from trauma, that part of the brain has been, negatively affected. And when that part of the brain is negatively affected, then we are at greater risk for finding inappropriate ways of coping, or we may succumb to, compulsive behaviors associated with substance or certain behaviors.
So if I'm watching tonight, Dr. Moss, and I have I've been privy and part of discussion, and I'm at the point now where I'm still grasping the fact that if I'm a gambler, or that I may be, that I may present some symptoms, that I may I want more money. I get this rush. I can't stop. I'm preoccupied with it. Some may rationalize, like with other addictions, their behavior, and may say, "Well, I need money. It's just fun, and I'm trying to pay some bills. I'm not bothering anybody." In closing, what would your final comments be to someone tonight?
If you're struggling with behaviors and not being able to limit yourself, and you feel distressed when you can't engage in that behavior, then you need to bring that attention to a professional. The greatest start for anything concerning mental health or with addiction is with your primary care provider. That's where the first conversation should begin, and then they can point you to resources. If you don't have a primary care physician, the state of Ohio has offered a great deal of training, policies for mental health programs to be able to execute, to be able to help people. So seeking out treatment in an outpatient mental health center may be my next choice, aside from your primary care physician, to have that dialogue about this difficulty.
Well, to our guests, to our viewers tonight, if you have more questions and you want more information and you'd like to be directed and you need help, you can call Dr. Moss at Modern Psychiatry. Give them your number, Dr. Moss.
So it's 513-440 and 5117. That's 513-440-5117. Thank you.
We strive to inform. We strive to provide help to those who may need to take a look at themselves and look at a remedy to their problems, or overcome those things that may be preventing them from being the best version of themselves. And so tonight, once again, to our viewers, we want to thank you for your time. We want to thank you. We know it's hot outside, so we'll thank the heat for having some of you on watching us tonight. But as always, we want to encourage you to feel better, become better, and live better.